Okay, remember that they're changing the sound of my voice. Now, some of you might ask, well, how do I know that I'm right and that they're wrong? Okay, well, first of all, I know that there's no Santa Claus at the North Pole in a kind of mythological way. And I know that Greek myths predate the myth of Santa Claus, at least in its modern form. Okay, so there's a pattern there that gives away that that's how the West thinks. There's theater arts, psychology, and propaganda. But more importantly, it's what we know beyond any doubt, okay, proves that I'm right and that they're wrong. How are people still here after 300,000 years? How are they still here? Why didn't they go extinct? Why are there deer paths? Now bear with me here. The paths are more important than you think. The paths are more important than you think. The reason why there are deer paths is because God wanted to show you something. If you go through the jungle, it's a bit more obvious. Okay, the various animal paths. If you're trying to avoid being bitten by a poisonous snake, or you're trying to see a predator coming, it doesn't help if there's thick bushes everywhere. It doesn't help if you're not familiar with the terrain. It's not a cure-all if you are familiar with the terrain, but it doesn't help. Nature helps people hone their senses naturally. That's how it's supposed to go. People who don't kind of get killed off. There's more than one reason why black people have the most kind of sense naturally on the spectrum as a group. Okay, it has to do with expelling people who aren't up to par, right? Spar and par. And I'm not trying to insult anyone here. These are the facts here. You need to get over your racial prejudices, your racism, your desire for your race to be equal or greater than every other race. You need to see the facts. We see that certain animals develop hooves. Okay, this is where we get the idea for shoes. Animals have fur. It's where they get the idea for clothes, right? They say, hey, those animals are warmer. So when we see it in terms of paths, it says stay on the path. So God is showing you something. He's saying go this way, not that way. Why didn't people die of food poisoning and diseases have to do with eating, dirty food early on? Okay? God allowed for things to go a certain way. And people who believed that there's a higher purpose, for the most part, they believed in one God or one main God. Okay, and there's a thin line between angels and minor gods. It's a story for another day. They're the ones who brought us to this point. They had a certain ability to look at nature and to see things. For example, when it rains, we see the grass start to sprout up, more than before. And then, we get the summer time where it gets really hot. And the snakes start going into that grass. When it's raining, they're not necessarily in the grass, right? They're finding some place to go. Okay? And snakes are like a phallic symbol. So there's patterns in nature. Okay, so it rains. There's grass. And grass is similar. I'm going to talk about something that's a little more sexual here for a moment here, because this is part of the message from God. And God doesn't have your same sense of, don't talk about that kind of thing. Okay, same sense of propriety or whatever, or what's proper or whatever. Okay, so it rains, here comes the grass, it's Mother Earth, it's like a vagina's hair, pubic hair, right? And so there's this little snake in there, okay? And you hone your senses to prevent yourself from being bitten by the snake. Now there's animals that are so big, like pigs and perhaps cows and bulls, that if they get bit by a snake, they have so much fat that they're not necessarily going to die from that snake bite. And there's bigger snakes, right, that wrap around you and break your ribs and constrict and kill you that way. So it's saying in what ways do the snakes kill you? And there's some snakes that aren't poisonous, that are basically harmless, that you can just eat. Okay? So in what ways did the snake kill you? And why is it wet first and then there's heat? See, a female, when she gets turned on, she gets hot and bothered, right, like a guy. But she also gets wet. When it rains, right, fertility. So this is a message in regards to fertility, okay? And honing the senses. And How do we figure out how to have a TV in a car? Because you had to look at the essence of nature and say, how is this working? So even now, mankind kind of looks to nature and looks to the principles of nature to figure things out, right? Protons, neutrons, electrons. How do we mix things together to create metals and so on, metallurgy and alchemy and chemistry and so on and so forth? How do they do these things, right? So God is telling you to look to nature for the answer. And when you look to nature, the bell that rings the loudest is justice. So as people look to the animals, right, hooves, right, they have horns and different sizes and shapes. There's different sizes and shapes of branches. And people mimicked animals' fighting styles to kind of come up with their own. They were taught to wear clothes from the animals, shoes from the animals, to mimic their fighting styles. And as we go down that path, we see something you can't get from a gun or a tank or a drone. We see the essence of life in martial arts, right? The way, the truth, and the life. The Lord is a warrior. To get to the essence of it, you have to go through martial arts, sparring, monotheistic martial arts, because it's what lesson. You can't just fight any way you want and say, hey, I think I'm getting there. You have to go the path that God gave you, and that is righteousness and justice. That's why making love is better than erotic desire. And who in popular culture are the symbols of erotic desire, right? Maybe Anna Nicole Smith back in the day, Ron Jeremy, Keith Rainier, right? Epstein, right? These kind of weird sexual habits these people have. We can look at them and say, hey, you're like a jackal. You're like a sloppy slug. You're not like a leopard or a falcon. You're not like the sun in its glory and grace and intensity. And we can see these patterns in nature. So God has already testified that I'm right. And we see in Psalm 19 and elsewhere in the Bible, it says the same thing. It says the heavens declare the glory of God, right? How? Through patterns in nature. The heavens declare the glory of God through patterns in nature. And this is key in how I know that I'm right. Because the message of God is not theater arts and tanks and guns and military and police and lying about God being on your side. The message of God is in the essence of martial arts, which is what nature gave us. The fruit of finding God in nature, was martial arts. The essence of it, the true path, the true way. David versus Goliath. Not David with a computer. Not David trying to masterfully manufacture a masterful sling. Any old sling will do. Any old sword would do. He cut off Goliath's head with his own sword. And it wasn't suited for him. But once you get to the principles, then you start working the sizes and shapes and so on and so forth. But that's not the same as the tree of knowledge. That's the tree of life. That's on the course of that. Not stopping everything and being a scribe or a scientist, but going on that course. Like you can dabble in science, but you shouldn't lose sight of the way. You should travel the way. And this is something that can't be done after my flesh dies. So you see, I've definitively proven that it is insane to not know that I'm right. If we're talking about God and the supernatural, we're talking about nature, the essence of it, the super part of it, right? Like a man and Superman, right? He's more than a man. He's more manly than a man. He's a Superman. It's more nature than nature. It's the essence of nature. It's supernature. There's no other way to look at it. Supernature and the supernatural. So you notice that in Psalm 19 it says that the heavens are proclaiming the work of God's hands, right? They're pouring forth speech without using a human language. And that goes back to Revelation, 17, where it says the waters stand for the peoples, nations, multitudes, and languages. Are you speaking God's language of martial arts and nature? I'm not talking about being a hippie here or a light worker or a new age. All that stuff is witchcraft, so to speak, right? That kind of psychology, gypsy, tarot card, circus, carnival stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. Talking about really being deep, not shallow. That stuff is shallow with bright colors and sugary stuff and snow cones and, cotton candy and so on and so forth. And I'm talking about really getting to the essence of it in martial arts, in truth, something that only I have done as far as people who are alive on this planet right now. Everyone else is just living psychology and kind of circus arts. What's the difference between being focused on being deep and being in more like a circus person putting on a show? It's whether you're going the way, the truth, and the life, right? Walking the way of righteousness along the path of justice. I am the way. I'm the king of righteousness. I'm the highest point of righteousness. So notice that the bridegroom, which is Christ, right? The sun is a symbol of Christ. It's also the symbol of God, right? Psalms, the Lord thy God is a sun and shield. So God and Christ, and where they overlap, where God is in me, and I'm in God, okay? And it's also said to be a champion, right? Goliath was a champion of the Philistines. David was said to be the champion of the Jews. And so the root and offspring of David is the top martial artist ever possible, is the essence of David, the root of David, the highest point of people like David. Kings, single combat kings, if you will. Now, obviously, the way the violence of the wicked drags them away, as it says in Proverbs. And wickedness overthrows the sinner, overthrows the wicked. So, sparring. You can see that someone as intense as I am, if I had a knife or sword in my hand, I've done knife strikes faster than anyone ever has. Okay, and they had to edit those videos. You could tell quickly by the way I spar that I could easily kill anybody in single combat, easily. They got, even now, when they fume and cripple me to the extreme, I probably paralyze myself or something because all the damage my body sustained from fumes and poisons, but I'd be victorious. Okay? They even sabotage me and edit my videos and have people playing stupid because they know that I am Christ. I am the highest point. I am the soul that achieved the greatest martial victories, the parable of the bags of gold, the parable of the 10 minas. Okay? To him who is given much, much is expected. To the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away from him. Things of this nature. I'm the Son of God. And if you're speaking kind of white supremacy, Jewish supremacy, LGBT supremacy, or any flesh-based supremacy, or token minority, Freemasons and all this, then you're speaking some kind of sissy language. And you're not speaking the language of God. You're speaking like a sissy throwing a fit instead of a man who's willing to obey God. And there's no comparison.